Steven Universe Future is not as bad as you think it is. Before I begin, I'd just like to say that I'm not claiming that Steven Universe Future is perfect. Nothing is perfect, and even if it was, there would probably still be people out there complaining about it. But just because it isn't perfect doesn't mean that you have to hate it with every cell of your being, which seems to be the goal of a good portion of the fandom. So if you based your opinion off of one of those people and have avoided watching it, or if you've been convinced into not enjoying it because of them, I'm here to tell you the full story so that you can take your own decisions on whether you like it or not. Keep in mind throughout this video that this is my opinion. I am a 16-year-old sophomore in quarantine who has no fancy degrees on mental illnesses. I just like Steven Universe. I'm not going to claim to know everything because I don't, but my opinion is that Steven Universe Future didn't do that bad of a job, and I have actual reasons for it. I'm not just going to be saying that because I'm a blind fan and I worship Rebecca Sugar or anything. No, it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't terrible either. I'll be separating this into categories, one for each problem that people seem to have. Each of the categories won't be a blind defense of the show, of course. I will be giving my own critiques and corrections throughout each of them, hopefully narrowing it down to a middle ground where we're both happy. The first category will be a tone change of the season. The second will be how everyone keeps on saying that it's a cartoon and shouldn't be this realistic, which is absolutely ridiculous. The third will be actual representation of the mental illness. The fourth will be how people keep on claiming that Steven is out of character the whole season. And the fifth will be how they wrapped everything up. So, first category. A lot of people have been noticeably complaining about how the sixth season of Steven Universe doesn't feel like Steven Universe anymore. They'll say stuff like, "Since when was this a cartoon show about mental illness?" But here's the thing. It's not a Steven Universe Season 6. It's clearly stated to be an epilogue season, separate from the main story. It's not meant to focus on the world of the gems. It's meant to tell you what happens after the world is saved, how Steven reacts to everything, and where the characters are in their happily ever after. To put it simply, the point of Future was to tell you what happens in the future. And the most important thing that they focused on was how PTSD affects someone in their adult life, which I think was a very good choice. I've never seen that done before in a TV show. When someone almost dies 24/7 throughout their entire childhood, there is no possible way they come out of that without serious trauma. Most cartoons brush it off, but Steven Universe Future faced it head on, and I admire that. They only had a certain amount of time to do something, and although they probably had a lot of other ideas in their minds, they decided to focus on the one most important and realistic one. I think that would be vital, especially to show us all the bad ways to cope with things and certain signs of a problem before it gets bad. We never get to see that, and they got to show us for the very first time what it's like. Or at least a cartoonish example of it. In a perfect world, they would have had the time and money to give Future its own arc entirely, with each gem developing off their characters further while also running Steven's PTSD in the background until it all meets at a head in the finale. This would have made Future much more satisfying, but they decided not to make it a Season 6 and instead focus their limited resources on the most important part of Future, Steven. It's an epilogue, not a continuation of the show. They were only allowed to do one thing, so they picked the most important one. It's meant to give you their future, not another arc. Okay, topic 2 is ridiculous, but I still have to explain this for you guys for some reason. Of course, not everybody thinks this, except I saw a lot of people in an entire video on it, so I just thought, okay, I absolutely have to add this in. Everyone is mad because it's just a cartoon show, and therefore putting things like mental illnesses inside of it is too realistic. Since when was too realistic a problem? This one irks me so much. People literally say, "This is getting too real for me. I thought it was just a cartoon." Would you rather them continue making Steven like he was in Season 1, whenever he was a naive little child? Is that what you want? You guys wished for development, then they gave you development, and you act like it's too realistic for a cartoon. Yes, it's a cartoon show, but that doesn't mean that it should just ignore things and act like everything is perfectly okay. It being a cartoon show doesn't mean that you should get mad at it for trying to take on serious topics. Do you want them to talk to you like you're a baby and say that nobody dies, guns don't exist, blood is gone, everybody is cheery and happy and oblivious? No. So stop getting mad at them for giving you a dose about how real life works. Anyway, on to topic 3. The representation of mental illness. This part is where I have the most critique on, but let me assure you it's not as messed up as the angry haters make it out to be. In my overall opinion, I think they did pretty well. The only problem is that they seem to have labeled it a bit too loosely. I've heard somebody point this out before. They say that the problem is PTSD, but they seem to be showing symptoms far beyond just that. They show Steven acting like he's bipolar or like he has anxiety, and sometimes where he's just downright crazy. Pinning all of that under the label of PTSD is probably a bad idea. It makes people with PTSD look like that they have angry outbursts where they crash a car, or they propose whenever they're 16, or they attempt murder on their magic monarch grandma after accidentally killing someone during a fight. That wasn't because of PTSD. That might have been a root, but it wasn't the only root. People with PTSD don't want to murder people. I think that if they wanted to do something like that, they should have mentioned more things than what they did. If you ask my uneducated self, I'd say that it's all a big mixture of bipolar disorder, maniac depression, anxiety, and something else that seems to be unique with Steven being a hybrid, whereas Jem's consciousness is separated from his and overreacts to the Jem's equivalent of cortisol, like they said in Growing Pains. Again, I don't have a degree on mental illness, so these diagnoses might be wrong. But even if they are, you can't say that I'm wrong about the fact that they shouldn't pin all of the problems down on just PTSD. It was clearly more than that, but they didn't mention it being more. So apart from what they actually labeled it to be, another complaint I've been seeing is that Steven's reactions to what's happening are too violent or exaggerated. Because, of course, just because someone's bipolar doesn't mean that they try to murder their monarch grandma. They might get angry mood swings, but it's usually not leading to straight out killing someone. And you're partway right, but trust me, there's an explanation for this. They do all these exaggerations because it's a cartoon, meant to be viewed by kids or young adults. They are not saying, if you have a mental illness, you will become a killer. They're saying, if you have a mental illness and try to suppress it, bad things will happen, and then show the bad things by making Steven do huge things like destroy a little homeschool or throw a tantrum or break the house or turn into an actual monster. The exaggeration is not meant to be applied literally to real life. It's only meant to say, this is a bad example and this is why you shouldn't do this, just get help. If you still don't get it, let's apply this idea to Spinel. She is the villain for the movie and was abandoned by Pink Diamond for 6,000 years. Spinel is a beloved character because she is relatable to people who have been abandoned. No, they are not saying that you have to be abandoned and completely isolated in a garden for 6,000 years to relate to her. They were just giving her as an exaggerated example of what happens in real life. And then, whenever she goes to Earth to kill everything with literal toxins, they are not saying that people who have been abandoned will become murderers. They are saying that the toxin is a metaphor, and the anger she was showing was an exaggerated version of the vengeance people who have actually been abandoned have. No, you might not want to murder the person who wronged you, but you would certainly be furious and hurt enough to do something damaging and to become toxic because of it. And just like Spinel, Steven was used as an exaggerated example for the audience. It's all a metaphor for what happens in real life. But one last thing before I finish this section. People are complaining about this whole idea of PTSD Steven isn't realistic because he didn't show any symptoms earlier. And I'm here to say that you're right. You're completely right. As I said before, Future was not perfect, and neither was the rest of Steven Universe. Steven probably should have been showing symptoms of this stuff in the movie, and even earlier before in the main series. It would be fairly simple fixes, of course, nothing to hate the whole season about. Just stuff like Steven being uneasy around Lapis after Malachite, or Steven not liking to look up at the stars at night anymore because he almost got lost in space that one time, or Steven being noticeably scared of his gem being touched because all he can think about is it being torn out of him. Nightmares, flashbacks, being more reserved and nervous right after missions, stuff like that. For me, I just kind of imagine this stuff happening in headcanons and fan comics and stuff. I don't hate the whole season for not having some sort of build-up before it. This is a very small problem that doesn't seem to require your full and undivided hate for. They should have made the problem simmering in the background rather than suddenly becoming noticeable after 2 years of everything being fine. So, to conclude this section, I think that they should have made it clear that the symptoms weren't exclusive to PTSD. There were several other problems, but you guys shouldn't be mad because they used Steven as an exaggerated example. And as an added note, they probably should have shown symptoms before Future just to give it a runway of sorts. Still, not enough problems to hate it for.